that's it. You can join in, say hello, how lovely. My name is Sandi Toksvig, and I am the host for this afternoon. I have to tell you, this is the 5th year of WOW. Who's been to WOW before? Yes! Fantastic. It's actually my 5th year as well at WOW. I've been involved and on the committee from the very beginning, and it is always, I have to say, a fantastically energizing experience with lots of wonderful women and men coming together to look at the world from a female perspective. There's a radical thought. And WOW, as you may be aware, is now a global presence. There are festivals all over the world, which is heartening, and I feel extremely at home here. I love this room in particular. I got married on this very stage. How great is that? I've been a feminist since I was 4, I think. It's possibly before then, but I remember when I was 4, I was given a doll for Christmas, and my brother got Meccano, and I was pissed off. And that rage has stayed with me, as I think that I am one of the few women in her late 50s still working on British television. So I love this festival, and I come away from WOW events with a spring in my step. However, we need to be realistic and not live in this very nice Southbank bubble. I'm going to recall some wonderful words of the former Baptist minister and Republican presidential hopeful, Pat Robertson. His famous claim, it was as Iowa was about to be poised to vote on a constitutional measure to bar sexual discrimination in 1992, and he said that feminism is a socialist, anti-family political movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. Guilty as charged. Of course, his words were spoken a while ago, but perhaps it's not all been progress, and we are not marching inexorably toward a day of full gender equality. If you look at history, then all societies tend to resist social and political development, and that resistance often takes the form of what can only be described as an unpleasant backlash. Yesterday, I was at a screening of India's Daughter. It's the documentary by Leslie Udwin about the brutal gang rape and murder of 23-year-old medical student Jyoti on a moving bus in Delhi in 2012. If you have not seen it, please, I urge you to. It is the most intense and amazing piece of film work. And the appalling events were followed by the most astonishing scenes of protest that I've ever seen, and certainly I think that have ever occurred in India, where the abuse of women was finally talked about in the open by everyone. But now the Indian government has banned the documentary from being shown, and it feels like a backlash against honest discussion. And the question is it? What does a feminist backlash look like, and who suffers most? So in this room, I would guess that we have confidence about the need for gender equality at every level of society, but does the possibility of backlash sometimes act as a deterrent for girls and women as they seek and search for a new level of emancipation? Well, it's not for me to say. I have a distinguished and delightful panel. We've already been sharing lipsticks and pens backstage. It was in that order, and I had nothing to do with the lipstick. First up, on the end, Mariane Pearl, who is managing editor of Chime for Change. One of the great things about WOW is you may find yourself being introduced to all manners of wonderful resources you may not have been familiar with. If you don't know Chime for Change, it is a global campaign for girls and women's empowerment. And on their website, you can read the most astonishing stories about the lives of women and girls, which I think it's fair to say mainstream media often overlook. And they have hundreds of projects for education, justice, and health for girls and women worldwide, which with the wonders of modern clicktivism, you can support. Next up, journalist and my friend, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, who apparently, is this true? You describe yourself as a lefty, liberal, anti-racist, feminist, Shia Muslim, part Pakistani, and very responsible person. Yeah. Can I add, even if it doesn't seem very feminist, she's a fabulous cook. Yasmin has been criticised in the past as being excessive in the pursuit of political correctness, and she's not been shy of criticism, including, as it happens, Chime for Change. So that'll be interesting to find out why, as you're sitting next to each other. And last but not least, writer and activist Beatrix Campbell, author of End of Equality. Can I describe it as a women's liberation manifesto? Is that lovely? Okay. I get very irritated when people say feminism is some new wave notion. Certainly for B, it is not. She set up a women's liberation group in the early 1970s and has not stopped campaigning since. So don't anybody tell me it's a new idea. This afternoon, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to outline their views before we have a panel discussion, and then there is a chance for questions from yourselves. So let's try and have the usual lively wow debate. And Marianne, if I may, ask you to begin.
Sure. You can keep talking, though, because it's really fun.
Can I put that on my website?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mariane Pearl, and I manage the storytelling platform of Chime for Change. It's a campaign that has also a crowdfunding part of it. Sorry, I'm really jet lagged because I came back from Kurdistan last night, and I'm not only jet lagged, I'm traumatized as well.
Do you know what? That's the best excuse I've ever heard.
Yeah. And so, and that's really interesting, you know, because I think I've never seen some different parts of society coming together for a cause that really, I mean, I don't think of myself as a feminist, really. I think I'm more of a humanist, because I don't really, to me, you know, it's not about that. It's about how do we treat each other, and I feel like this is an incredible time because, despite the backlashes that we're going to talk about, people are getting aware that this can no longer be, right? And the way I see it at Chime happening is really happening actually through the individual girls and women standing up against oppression on their own. So I give you an example, talking about, for instance, in Malawi, a story we did at Chime that really, really, taught me a lot about what's really going on in the world with women and girls. It's a girl. Her name is Mercy, and she's a homosexual, but Malawi is a deeply homophobic country. And this girl, who had no internet, no one told her what to do, but she knew that she didn't want to live her whole life married to a man that her father had chosen for her. So what she did, because she didn't know what to do, she went to the Malawi news and said, "I'm a lesbian, you can write it down front page." And that's what they did. And the backlash, brought to church, exercised, thrown out of the house, etc. But all these other girls that never have spoken out have come together now. And so this is just an example, and I see a lot of those, much more than, if we care to watch, it is quite incredible, the power of women. And I think it is based everywhere in the world, and I think it is based in this really, really strong sense of justice. Now, I just want to say what I feel about, this whole issue. What I see is that actually keeping women down is quite an intricate web of elements, right? And it's also very simple. I think it's all about who owns the narrative, and women never had a say in history. If you remember, when you went to school, you were talked about wars, you were talked about all these different pieces of history, and you never heard about what women were going through. Never. So what's going on now is like we recapturing our own voice, and that is, I think, the greatest source of hope for our time. As I was just coming back from Kurdistan, it was horrible. It was horrible. You've all heard about ISIS publishing a list of price for selling women in the market. By the way, I'm worth like £10. So these people are dealing with hardcore ISIS craziness, but also it's easy. The narrative is mentality, tradition, religion, right? So most of girls in this world have, because of that narrative, are responsible for the honor of the family and get killed for that, right? So I just finished quickly because I was like, so last night I was in Erbil talking to, actually I went to Erbil to give a workshop, storytelling workshop to Yazidi and Christian refugees. And that's what I'm going to keep doing, because I feel that when they're given a voice, women are really powerful. And in the world of women, it's enough sometimes of one person like Mercy to transform centuries of mentality, tradition, religion, justification to oppress women. So I'm like with this girl, and she's helped me with the workshop. It's all good, it's the end. And then we have a conversation, and she said, one time my father went with my uncle to kill my cousin. And I was like, what? She said, yeah, he had to kill my cousin. And it's like, why did he want to kill your cousin? It's like, well, at first, she fell in love with someone from another community, but then, she gave up that. But then there was an honor thing anyway to fix. So it was a completely normal narrative for her that a girl, because of some family problem, should be killed. That's what we're up against. And I think the only way to really do it, to me, I don't think we're going to do it through politics, because it's very deep. The denial is very deep. And for instance, in this country, I remember doing an interview with the BBC, and the first question the man asked me was like, obviously in this country we've fixed that problem, but you go over the world and tell us about how awful these people are. I said, no, you have, it's right here. You have a problem right here. So it's incredible. It's quite mesmerizing to see the level of denial. I laugh about it now because, if you undo it, it's kind of simple. And so I say, in order to get that revolution going, which we really need, it's recapturing the voice. And that will come with a price, and it is coming as a price. But I'm going to tell people.
Mariane, thank you very much. I wish I was that articulate when I was jet-lagged. There we are. Fantastic. Yasmin.
We've been told not to make big speeches, so I'm not going to do that. But I do want to say I worry about this word backlash. After the disgraceful 50 Shades of Grey, I don't like the image of a lash and a backlash. Can we have another word? That's the thing for you. Come up with another word by the end of the session. Perhaps, and I owe my husband this. He just said this morning, as I said I was coming here, he said, why don't you just talk about the war on women, which is the war of the 21st century? And I think, actually, it is as serious as that. But I want to kind of bring up 4 or 5 issues. But before that, being a journalist, I have to tell you a couple of stories. And I was writing my new book on England, which just came out. The reason I wrote it was because somebody from the EDL, the English Defence League, kept hounding me for nearly 18 months by email, abusing me and saying at the end, always saying at the end, and you're a coward, you won't meet me for coffee. Now, I'm not a coward, so I met him for coffee. The worst sort of 1.5 hours of my life. But what really came out, he didn't hold back, it was horrible. How all his insults were sexual. How almost everything, how many times did he say to me he wanted to slice off my clit before he would put me on a boat. And he would do the same to my daughter, who, although was half English, she was a bastard half-caste. All the time. It was, and he was dressed in a nice suit, well-spoken, didn't tell me his name or what he did. The other story is about last night. I took a young couple out to eat. He's the son of a dear friend who's a journalist in India, just recently married to a very lovely Indian woman, graduate. And she was saying how they met. And she said, in India, these days, because men are so hopeless, we pick them. I picked him. I asked him for a date. I was quite gobsmacked by that, because my daughter was the same age. And we were talking about all this the other day, and she said, I would never ask a man out, Mum. I said, Goodness me, I've been asking men out since the age of 13 because they are frankly hopeless. And I even chased your dad. What's wrong with you? There is a kind of new reserve, a fear of being judged as feminist and, I don't know, castrators or whatever. I was really interested in India, which is probably one of the unkindest countries in the world for females from before birth to death. There is this new generation which is kind of coming up. So the picture's always interesting wherever you're looking. Two other little points. I read this morning in The Guardian, I don't know if you all did, which I thought was really interesting, and comes back to what you were saying, that there are more men called John at the top of big business than there are women. Isn't that a great fact? So, don't let us think it's all somewhere else. But I wanted to raise for discussion, because this is a kind of conversation, is that we have to kind of look at this in terms of a kind of violent paranoia in places where some progress was made, mainly in the West. A new kind of violent paranoia has emerged, and we get it through Twitter all the time, and I don't need to tell this audience how awful it can be. And I get the triple bind. It's the woman thing, it's the Muslim thing, and then it's the race thing. So, but it is pretty violent in words and violent in imagination and so on. So there's a kind of violent paranoia in countries which achieved some progress. I was talking to a Danish friend of mine, and she said, no, it's not as bad as, it's become part of our culture. But true, there are now new ways of talking about gender equality which worry me, she said. So we should never sit back and think the business is done. But in nations where this has not been achieved, I think there is a kind of really, almost a planned reactionarism. And this is happening in India, absolutely. The protest about the film told you a lot. They told you that there is now a new government in power which does not approve of progressive ideas. There is a new atmosphere, and that there is a reactionary kind of mood, even among the middle classes. And I think so we have to kind of understand what's happening in context, that the problems are not the same, though we should take them all very seriously. Nationalism, certainly in countries like India and the Arab world and certainly parts of Africa, nationalism is used as a veil to hide the hatred of women. And certainly what you were talking about in Malawi, my old country, Uganda, women's rights at every level, whether it's personal choice, sexuality, the right to divorce, the right for basic equalities. It is all kind of these days pushed into you are not patriotic. You are disloyal to your country if you speak out. Are you a true Ugandan? How can you criticize your country? And in India, this is a very powerful force. I think India's got away with rather a lot of good PR. And one has to remember that the feticide of female babies from that point to widows who are immediately, even if the widow is 20 years old, her hair is shaved, and she's banished in a kind of white sheet to die before she's dead. And we haven't spoken enough about it, but other nations too. So I'm interested in the way nationalism is now used. I'm also interested in the way modernity is posing some of these challenges to both men and very conservative women, who incidentally sometimes can be our worst enemies. So where modernity is being lived and has been lived in this country, for example, in Europe, since the 18th century, progressively, there is a kind of new revolt against what it has done to women. I'm summarizing. And okay, the Americans are a little bit crazier than us, but actually we do see it here a lot. about, where have we the divorce rates, women living with women, what's going to happen to the children, all of this. But people edging towards modernity, which is most of the world, really, they want to kill it before it grows. And that includes people living in the West who are edging towards modernity. So when I talked to quite a lot of Asian families, what do they tell me? Who are oppressing their women, who, will not let their girls have any kind of autonomy. They can't even have a phone which they can talk into on their own. A young runaway who came to my house, and I sheltered her for 18 months because she was threatened with death because she could not speak on the phone without all her family listening. And she couldn't bear it. She wasn't doing anything on the phone. She just hated the idea that she had no selfhood, no privacy. And so she ran away, and she came and lived with us, and it was terrifying to see how something as little as that, in a modern state, makes a young girl feel so frightened that she runs for her life. And all of these forced marriages, all the kind of recapture of, especially in certain immigrant groups, of women and females from this thing called modernity is leading to some of the biggest crises. Forced marriages are higher now than when I became a journalist and I was writing about it. They are much, much higher. So it tells us something about modernity. And the final thing is, and this brings me to the India story, I was quite alarmed this morning to read a column in The Guardian by a very good Indian thinker, female thinker and writer, because at some point she was suggesting that these are national problems, these are our problems, and when white women get involved or other women get involved, it's not acceptable. Wow tells you something else. I think we should all say something else. When something happens to a woman in Kurdistan, and something happens to a woman in Bradford, and something happens to a woman, young girl in a middle-class family in London, it is our problem. All our problems. Something for all of us around the world. So this is what I mean. There's a kind of ownership taken. And the other very strange thing that was said in that column, do have a look at it, was almost as if there's a kind of, when this film was made, it was with dishonorable purpose. I found that quite shocking, actually, in the 21st century, to have an intelligent Indian woman reacting in this way to a film which was extraordinarily important to make. So this is what I thought we could discuss in the session.
Wonderful, Yasmin. Thank you very much. I have to say, two of the things that Leslie Udwin said yesterday which really struck me, one of them was that part of the complaint from the government about the film is that it will affect tourism.
Yes.
And the idea that the rape victim somehow has brought shame and dishonour upon herself, the notion that the film is in itself dishonourable is kind of coming back to that thing. It was, maybe we might come on to that again a little bit later. B, please.
We're all very familiar with the spectacular phenomenon of online abuse. Many of you in this room will have experienced it. And I think the surprise, certainly that I feel about it, is what it revealed that we didn't quite know. The extraordinary malign creativity that is invested in this stuff, the kind of stuff that you alluded to. But that isn't what I want to talk about. It is something which is important in this conversation. But I think it's one of the things that's important about it, apart from itself and its strangeness, is that it is an argument with us. It is about us. It is because we exist. And I want to extend that thought to a longer, larger landscape, which is, and I suppose it goes back to the moment that you described. Let's think about this thing. In the 1970s, all of the world's institutions signed up to gender equality. the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, the EU, all of them. So you could be forgiven for thinking, the end of patriarchy is nigh. And then bang, no sooner had those institutions enshrined that idea, no sooner had we bounced, those of us of a certain age, bounced onto the political stage, danced onto the political stage, and proposed a new democratic deal between men and women, across gender and across generation. No sooner had that happened than the conditions for its realisation were erased. I don't think we knew then how significant, if we're not going to use the word backlash, and I think you're right to think, is the word bad enough and big enough to describe what has happened? So maybe let's think about it in terms of the great repudiation. Because instantly what happened was that the world that was, that was supposed to be promised in the idea that socialism was finished, the end of patriarchy is nigh, the great Enlightenment wish that with democracy and capitalism and prosperity would come peace and equality. And it would kind of evolve, because you see, all of us, really, we're evolutionary failures, but, as we get better and we approach this great pinnacle of humanity, man, and become more like him, it'll all be sorted out, and then we'll all be equal. Now, if we track the evidence between then and now, what we witness is what this great repudiation amounts to. And what I'm suggesting is that the world is now governed by a new gender settlement. And it is the great repudiation. I'm calling it, it's an ugly name for an ugly deal, neoliberal neo-patriarchy. It's not the same old patriarchy because it's an answer to us, and we didn't exist before. And what I think is important about it is that neoliberalism is not very interested in gender. It relies upon it, and it uses it, but it's not particularly in its vocabulary. But what it lays its institutions to, what it claims, is the resources that patriarchal values and traditions give it. So, the world that we're now living in, and both of you have given us some examples of it, but it's a world that nobody thought would happen. My partner's mother didn't think it would be like this. There are days when she can't listen to the wireless because she lived her adolescence in the Second World War and was given the promise of her generation, never again. My generation was schooled in that idea. We were bequeathed the idea that war was a kind of atavistic, primitive response to that. And what we've learned in the Great Repudiation is this, that war and violence are very useful. They are very productive. And the new wars being described by Mary Kaldor, a great feminist scholar of war and human rights, look like this, that rape and pillage are not just the rewards of war, they are, but they are the modus operandi of the new wars. The new wars that Yasmin and Mariane alluded to are wars where the destruction, rape, humiliation and shame of women is part of the point. And of course what that carries with it is another project, the production of violent masculinities. And these are a different kind of violent masculinities than the young men who were drilled into traditional armies and doomed to die. In the old wars, 85% of the casualties were young men. Now, 80% of the casualties are women and children. So you're right. This backlash actually is bigger than that lash. It is a war against women and children as part of the resources that are involved in the new kind of geopolitical thing that is being sorted out. And these wars attract impunity and a sense that justice is impossible. This is a terrible thing. a terrible thing to do to people. To generate this idea that actually there is nothing that you can do about this. The perpetrators will be never called to account. And some of the most violent places on the planet are also the most neoliberalized places on the planet. The beautiful revolution in South Africa, assailed by the neoliberal deal that has impoverished its state, an emaciated state in any case. So men's violence imperils the very livability of these fragile states in South Africa, in Soweto, in Sao Paulo. Venezuela is being brought to its knees by armed men's resistance to women, and indeed many of them to each other. So one of the features of this great repudiation is the reappearance of violence, not as something that's primitive, but as you say, something that is modern. It may be modern only because it's got a knife, but it's connected to things, a new geopolitical deal that is absolutely modern and is defining the shape of the 20th century. And justice and injustice and impunity describe it. Okay, well, that's far away. We don't have that problem here, we think, even though, of course, we're participants in it. But we have our problem with impunity. We've got one of the best laws against sexual violence that you could have anywhere, framed by feminists in the last Labour government, themselves participants in feminist movement politics that have been so very vigorous for years and years and years. And you know what? The impunity that prevails around violence against women and children is such that one of the great scholars of sexual violence and what to do about it and the policing of sexual violence now says you have to conclude that if you like hurting women and raping women and violating women, you will get away with it, just about. In effect, crimes against the bodies of women have been decriminalised. I want to turn to just a slightly different register here. We would have all assumed, and it's in the language that accompanies every annual announcement from the Office of National Statistics about the equal pay gap. Right, something that affects us all because it affects how much we earn, what we've got to live on, and what we'll die with. What, when you're my age, you'll be thinking about, well, if you're my age, your pension will be half of that of a man, just because he's a man. And for all the young women in this room, it may be that in this moment, you're paid the same as your male equivalent. But as soon as you and your male equivalent become parents, because men are parents too, remember? Children are not yet immaculately conceived. The whole conversation about parenting, of course, is always thoroughly gendered. What that means is that you will instantly, and for the rest of your life, be financially punished. So, in the world, in Europe, the pay gap is absolutely stable. This is what the new repudiation, the great repudiation means. It is flat. It's around about 26% on average in Europe. In China, the great insurgent economy, perhaps now the greatest economy in the world, before it fell in love with capitalism, everybody was poor and they were equally poor. Women earned about 87% of what men earned. Now, women earn 67% of what men earn. In India, which was promised with the great neoliberalization of its economy in the 1990s, that pauperized Indian women, all of whom work, would be proletarianized. They'd get a proper wage. They'd have regularized lives. And the great Indian economist, feminist economist, Jayati Ghosh tells us that, in fact, the Indian economy has not been feminized, it's been de-feminized. So the most dynamic region of the world, dominated by China and India, are places that are rehabilitating the gender differential, economically and in terms of their sexual cultures. And of course, these are regions which have given to the world an absolutely unprecedented demographic, the masculinization of population itself. This is not a function of the poorest places on earth. Kerala, one of the poorest places on earth, is also one of the most egalitarian. It doesn't happen there. It happens in the rich bits of some of these societies, or the resourced bits of some of these societies. Okay, so what we're describing here is a moment when the violence and violence as a resource in the making of masculinities is being renewed. The economic potential for equal opportunities and equality is being erased. There are new dynamics for the undervaluation of women's work. Indeed, the very idea of, the working day, the working week, a living wage, all of this is hotly contested. And you might think, it's terrible, but actually we're all a bit better. And, we are. Men are a bit better. A lot of men are a bit better. In fact, they're so much better that over the last 30 years, the rate of men's contribution to the care of all of us, including their own children, has risen at a rate of 1 minute per day, per year. That is as good as it gets. I will end by just saying, it's as bleak as that, but there is hope.
Well done, Dave. Thank you. I have to say I very much enjoyed Nigel Farage on the subject of maternity leave. I don't know if you heard him. He said if women are pregnant, what they should do is depart and leave the job open for another young lady. So that's nice. So the first thing that strikes me is that part of the problem is finding the right language for everything, that perhaps we just don't have the right language. And Marianne, I was very struck by you saying that you are not a feminist, you are a humanist. But I suspect some feminists would say that being a feminist is a humanist stance, that unless we put women at the top of the agenda, men aren't going to do well either. So I wonder why you want to distance yourself from the word.
I want to distance myself because I mean it. I don't like injustice, whether it's orientated towards gay people, black people, Muslim people, women, and I think women are actually capable. You know what? I tell you, I'm going to say something positive. Is that okay?
Go crazy.
Basically, this whole, everything we're talking about is about power. This is what we're talking about, right? And the means is violence, right? Then there's a narrative, which is usually tradition, religion, blah, blah, blah. And that's it. No? And that's why in the 21st century, we still have, like in Cameroon, women ironing the breasts of their kids so that they don't attract the potential rapists. Women ironing their breasts, okay? That's why we're having FGM, so you don't have pleasure in your life. I mean, it's kind of like, it's really, sometimes you feel like, can you come up with a better story at least, Because, it's just incredible what's going on, right? And so, but as I said, the people who do that do it because they can. But the women that are changing this, are capable of more than being, you know what, I don't like labels, I think labels are a big problem in our society, right? Because, it doesn't allow you to meet someone, like I met Yasmin, but I don't care if she's Shia, Sunni, or things or that, Hinduist. This is not my problem, it's hers.
Just like my lipstick.
Yeah, actually my first line was, do you have any lipstick? But and I have to have the possibility of meeting someone and having a dialogue with someone without labeling that person right away, and that does a lot of harm, right? So if I label myself as a feminist, what does that mean? I don't like men, we don't know yet. We haven't redefined really what it is, What I know and what I see also in women is that they're capable of going further than that, and they are capable of leading the one revolution we haven't done, we have done technology, we have done, industrial, we have done everything but the human revolution. And women are capable of that. What I mean by that is that they are capable of absorbing their environment, their community, their family, and still network and help other women. It's just incredible. We have developed that. And why have we developed that? Because we've suffered so much. We know everything there is to know about This is why the victims, when I go see women like I did now, yes, of course they're victims, the Yazidi refugees, they've lost everything. Yet, when you tell them, the first thing I did when I got there, I told them, I don't want to hear about ISIS right now, because I don't want ISIS to define who you are, And then they start telling you about their stories and their dreams, and they become human beings again. And these women are capable, they have the answers. How do we change that? Because they know everything there is to know. They have the emotional intelligence, they have the experience, they have everything. And the mothers of these people, are now, for the first time, I think, in any generation, pushing their girls, even though they know they will pay the price. So our role is to support these people. Because I think that, we can all trust people that have no vested interest, and most of these women have no vested interest in, they're not trying to be elected, they're not trying to be rich or successful, they just really want peace, And who else do we have that anyone can trust? Just because, the motivation behind her actions are naturally altruistic. I can't pronounce that word in English. What is it? Altruistic. Yeah. And so that is what I think we need. We really don't need. I mean, the situation is so bad that we don't need men against women, white against. We need to dialogue. And I think that these people, these individuals, coming from all kind of backgrounds. For instance, I give you an example. We like to cover why are our young people going to join the jihad but who's covered the number of women that I've just met who've left everything they have to go and help these women out there, and they do it on their own. They buy their own camera. One of them used, she saved her money for a school for 5 years. She saw this all. She went out there. Why aren't we covering that? And so the more I think, the darker, and we have reached a low. I mean, I don't know if in precedent law, because we didn't know what was going on with women before, but now we do, so we know how bad it is. And I think that the courage of this individual, this is why, I do what I do, and I focus on giving people, the chance to tell their story. They shine. The more, we're going to the dark, the more they shine, for sure, And I think that these people, we should protect them from labels. We don't need them to be feminist, this and that. We just need them to be who they are, and support them. And I think that in that, and also the other thing I wanted to say about power is that, if it took so many different layers of society, we have the new modern version, which is online abuse. I mean, who's going to think among us girls to send a picture of someone's penis to offend him? I mean,
not me anyway.
Right?
No,
not you. That was a kind of a good idea. No, I'm saying it takes many forms, and it will keep taking many forms. But it's about power. And why is that? Why are we keeping women so down? It's because they're powerful.
But I'm interested, because we started talking about words and the power of words. I'm interested in how the media portray women, and Susan Faludi in her Backlash book, she talks a lot about this. There has been a proliferation of articles, you're all journalists, for example, about the sorrow of the single woman or the burnout of the professional. She quotes the New York Times as reporting that childless women are depressed and confused, and Newsweek said that unwed women are hysterical. B, what can we make of this kind of slew of sorrow which apparently emancipated women are suffering? What is that about?
We should just be crying.
Yeah, all the time.
I think it's stupid. This stuff is just stupid. What is remarkable is that it gets any kind of airtime at all. Now that, in a sense, is a measure of the space that has been accorded to stupidity as an argument. Is that all they can say to us? Now, partly, I want to kind of swing that to what you've been saying, because naming stuff is really important. We are being named all the time as slags and sluts and harlots and depressed. We have very good reason to be depressed.
Hysterical. Hysterical.
We've got very good reason to be hysterical as well.
And confused.
And the thing is, we're not. We're not. But there is something going on here, I think, which is an extraordinary level of indulgence for rubbish and crap and stupid. Now, why? Not because it just is the incontinent rubbish that it is, but because it speaks to something which has institutional power. And it services that. Well, even institutional power will think it's rubbish, and it doesn't have to say it. But that doesn't matter. It gets airtime. And it gets airtime because, precisely, we're living in a world which this horrible thing, the neoliberal neo-patriarchy, it doesn't describe us, but it does describe something that is very unstable, that has to fight for its life, and it has to lay its tongue to all this rubbish and crap, because, of course, anything that doesn't describe us as what we are will always be rubbish and crap. Because the only alternative is to describe the extraordinary stamina, smartness, ingenuity, worldliness, all the things that you're describing and share with the women that you meet. That's what we're like. But they are... I've got to the end of the sentence and I don't know what I'm saying, so I'll shut up.
No. What I like is you're a woman and you're very honest about it, so I think that's fantastic. I'm going to pick up on something you said, Yasmin, and I hope I haven't misquoted you, that you talked about women sometimes being our own worst enemies, that is true, and that there are some difficulties about it. It's one of the things that is very difficult to talk about, isn't it, to say, actually, a lot of women are the reason why feminism hasn't, or some women are the reason why feminism hasn't succeeded. But you yourself, at the risk of causing a fistfight, have been critical.
Yes.
Of Marianne's work. Do you want to just talk about that?
Well, I was critical of the opening to which I went. And I thought, it was just so celebrity-led. And actually, one couldn't speak to the celebrities.
For people who don't know, do you want to just talk about the sort of thing when you talk about the celebrity-led?
Well, it was when they launched it. A few of us were invited to this hotel, and it was big Hollywood stars. And I have no problem with Hollywood stars taking up causes, but what I found, I just felt that day that it's become a kind of accessory. It's something that you've got everything, you've got all the shoes you need and all the Oscars you need, so let's have a cause. And I felt very strongly that day that there was no... it was a show. It was a show. And a part of me did mind that very much. Now, since then, I've followed the work, and at grassroots level, the real work is fantastic. I still think there's a problem when... I think it was Karl Lagerfeld who was sponsoring this event, and it was a bit
the very first thing you see on the website, Marianne, is that Gucci Perfumes is very pleased that you're there. So
it's that was bothering me.
Is there an issue now that in order for these messages, and there is wonderful work happening, that you have to have Kellogg's Special K tell you that it's a good idea? Is that part of playing into the modern corporate branding of things?
I'll tell you something. I don't think I understand what you're saying, but I don't think we can afford it. I think we need everyone who's, willing in their own capacity, to help, and you're going to help because you're, 2 million tweets in 5 seconds. Okay? And then reaching everyone all over the world. You have money, you contribute with money. You have fame, you contribute with fame. It doesn't matter. You can just stay who you are. Because otherwise, then if you fit my checkbox, then you win. No, we have to go over that, And I think that for me, I really... what I do my best, but there's a lot of the things that these people can do that I cannot do, and I'm really happy they're doing it, right? So it's a matter, and I really want, this is really important actually, it's a really important question, because your experience, I think you're Shia Muslim, aren't you? Yes. Your experience, is something that we need. And I'm not gonna... No, not you personally, Yasmin. I just need your lipstick.
Yes. But I want to come back to the women question. I think a lot about, why this happens. Some of the, when we wanted to get rid of the page 3 girls, and along came Rebecca Brooke, and what did she do? She almost kind of even was more proud of the fact that she wasn't going to change it. And I think it is to do with power. It is to do with power. You know, why doesn't my...
It's interesting because you're the one who doesn't like political correctness, no?
No, I love political.
Oh, you do?
I'm a very politically correct person.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm completely... But the women thing is important because I think sometimes it is because they've entered institutions where the rules have been written, the way you behave is determined where you go next. But sometimes I do think we have to ask women. I think of how many Muslim women, my mother's generation, I wrote a book about this in November called Refusing the Veil, because my mother's generation threw the wretched thing off way, way back in the 20s, yeah? Before she died, she was so depressed that here were women putting this wretched thing on again. In the name of what? And I talk to them and they say it's choice, as if they are buying Kellogg's cornflakes. And I say to them, do you understand what it says about you? How you're defining yourself when you agree to this garment, whatever form it is. You're saying my sexuality causes disturbance in the public space and I am responsible for all the dirty thoughts these men are having. Why don't we veil men's eyes instead? You know?
I want to talk a bit about social media and the fear of being pilloried. There was a very good case of Ched Evans, if you remember, the footballer and convicted rapist, and there was a petition, 150,000 strong petition, saying he shouldn't get his job back because he was no longer a suitable role model. And those women were pilloried as being feminist rabble and a feminist gang. And I think part of the reason some women don't participate in the general public debate is the fear of that pillorying. The Jane Austen on the £10 note is a very good example.
So many women have been so hurt in some of these campaigns, and they are very personal and very abusive. And at the same time, they just don't give in. I mean, the woman who initiated the Ched Evans change.org movement that actually stopped a football club taking him back on as if, and then stopped another one, and generated a huge debate amongst football fans, which was riveting. I'm not a football fan, but I'm surrounded by them, as we all are. And they themselves weighed in to this conversation in a way that I thought was very illuminating. So the women who led it, some of them got death threats, some of them were frightened. It was very abusive. And thanks to them, something very beautiful happened. Football writers, who maybe they just like football, but they're decent blokes, were writing about how they didn't think that to re-employ Ched Evans before he'd made any concession at all. Not an inch, not a flicker of recognition that what everybody else thought was a rape, he didn't think was a rape, he called it an infidelity. So he found himself at the centre of an argument that a man like that never thinks he's going to be in, number one. He thought he was going to get away with it. He didn't get away with it, rather important and very rare. And then Britain had a conversation initiated by women, one of the women who'd never done anything like this before in her life. She was just a football fan. So the thing's paradoxical. Some of it is very toxic. But, apropos of your point, actually, about, being championed by people with money, this thing changed football culture. It forced the Professional Footballers Association to think about this, and it really didn't want to. It forced the FA to think about it, and it really doesn't want to. And it forced men who were often silenced, but actually don't like rape. They don't. A lot of men don't do rape. Amazing, isn't it? They don't. It gave them their voice as well. All the men I know who were football fans thought that this was outrageous. So, something very interesting is tumbling around in our culture, and you can't say that it's only just horrible that the women get abused. Yeah, they do get abused, and they don't give in, and then the conversation becomes kind of viral. So something very interesting is happening in our culture. And I think it's precisely because the response to some of these women is so there are not words. we all now know what is in people's heads, and we didn't before. That's useful. We've learned something.
It is, but I'm disturbed.
But it doesn't stop it.
No, it doesn't stop it. But I'm disturbed when I see the portrayal of women in film and television. You talked about 50 Shades of Grey, which is revolting. There was a laddish sitcom on, I think it was only last month, and there was a gang rape joke in it, and that seems perfectly acceptable. I'm horrified. I'm afraid I've positively banned I have a 10-year-old stepdaughter. I banned her from watching the Disney Channel because it is just silly young girls giggling about boys. That's it. That's all there is. There is no sense of they might want to be a doctor or something else. Do you think that film and television, Yasmin, has done a disservice, modern stories have done a disservice to the way in which women are portrayed?
Yeah, I think so. And I think certainly I'm really, really pleased to see so many young women here. I'm so pleased, because I was beginning to worry that my daughter's generation is scared. She sees what happens to me. She sees the backlash against all, and there is a withdrawal from feminism, from wanting to push the argument, from taking on. So I think, books too. I mean, a mother sending her 10-year-old boy yesterday, on National Book Day, dressed up as the sadist in 50 Shades of Grey, and she thought it was funny.
Wow.
I mean, this is what I mean. Sometimes women have to think as well. Sex in the City, a lot of films, a lot of magazine writing is kind of reintroducing the idea that a feminine woman is not a feminist woman. And they're doing it in a very kind of entertainment way, but it is getting under the skin. It is getting under the skin. And, I think this is a newish thing. And what I don't even know...
Gloria Steinem in her time talked about this.
Yeah, but the spread of it is... And I don't quite know what to do about it. And then that leads to, how do I look? My body, am I thin enough? Am I blonde enough? It's absolutely wrecking the selfhood of women of all ages, from the age of 8, 7. So we're in a different world.
And I want to be, I would refer to you and I as old school feminist, if that's okay. I went to, it was very interesting, it was here, I went to a talk with the American writer Lena Dunham, which was very interesting, and she's extremely popular. I can only describe it, in my view, as feminism light. She said this very strange thing, which I didn't really understand. She said that when a man whistles at her in the street, she feels both furious and validated, which made her sound like a parking ticket, but... But what do you think of the current so-called new wave?
A new wave of feminism?
Yeah.
I adore it.
Great, good.
I adore it. I just think it's so... Do you know, it's only like feminism ever was. There are fissures, there are rows, there are people who get on your nerves. That's fine. What's brilliant about it is that these young women of this generation have seized spaces that didn't exist. And they've just seized them, and they use them very, very creatively, and they are doing what we all have to do when you encounter feminism. You learn. Because the thing that's, I think, tricky about feminism, and maybe this goes to the Lena Dunham problem, is that it is also fundamentally about a challenge to yourself that is very unsettling. I can remember... I don't want to sound like an old fogey, so I'm not going to say anything more about anything I remember, but except this. I can remember reading this marvellous women's liberation movement pamphlet called The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm. Bear in mind, I'm 21, married, and I read it, and I was astounded, and I threw it across the sitting room, because I was so disturbed. It disturbed my sense of what my body was, what it could do. And the huge challenge of it was that it incited me to change my sexual life. That's huge and scary. In the end, ecstasy, I have to tell you. But...
I wish we had more time.
But hugely challenging. So all of us, you're not just taking on a system and men, you're taking on yourself in ways that are sometimes very tingling and lovely, but also nerve-wracking. So feminism is a dangerous kind of politics to engage in, thrillingly dangerous, but full of all sorts of stuff that you just, quite compromising, but so...
Yeah.
You know, I want to tell you, like, as a young journalist, I was once in a women film festival, and it was the scariest experience I've ever had. Because I couldn't identify this with these women that were angry, that were aggressive, and I was like, what?
You mean like you?
No. What I mean is actually is that I think, for all the people here, I think you should take everything we say and then, digest it and then throw it away. Because the thing is, see, for me, it's like, Yasmin, who are you to judge someone else's sincerity in getting involved?
Well, she's entitled. She's her.
No, I don't
she is
think
entitled. Everybody's entitled.
You're entitled for a particular experience, but we have to stop doing that.
I don't agree with you. The whole point, I'm not just going to talk about me and what I do and what I live. I have a duty. When I see a woman in the park opposite my house, wheeling a pushchair with a girl child and a little boy walking by her, and she's completely, on a hot summer's day, completely covered, including her eyes, I have a duty to speak out. I do not think that it's her choice. I don't. I believe, however punished I am, and believe me, I am really viciously punished, and I'm not always right, but I want people to engage beyond their own domestic circle.
But are you saying, Marianne, that we shouldn't... You talked about anger and not identifying with it. I personally think we need more rage. That's what I think. I think we don't have enough.
Well, what I'm saying is that, not everyone is a militant. Not everyone is,
Sure.
we need everybody.
Yes.
And whoever you are, and whatever your capacity is, it's fine. You don't need to, join a group. You don't need, it's what I'm trying to say here is like always, and it takes a lot of effort and will to always come back to the individual human being. Because if you raise that, maybe you raise a, militant, maybe not, but you raise a human being that other people can, be inspired by, and the level of tolerance we need, and especially when you're right, it's good to be right, but it doesn't create any value, okay? So how do we change things? Right? So, let's not, we have enough debates, fine, debates are good, but, really it's about everybody matters,
But can I just say, one of the things that part of putting it right demands is that you know what it is that needs to be put right. Now, one of the things that's going on in the world now is the reinstatement of the sovereignty, of the idea that men are entitled to everything, that rape is a reward, that misogyny is only not part of a system. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that there is systematic, institutionalized, ideological stuff going on that is to do with actually large-scale social power. It's not just about individual behavior and individual choices. So you have to name it. You have to name what the enemy is. You have to name what side you need to be on.
Yeah, but I think that's your role. That's your role. And then you have someone whom you never hear about, who's leading the fight in her family, so that she can change. So this is what I mean.
Of course.
You, for instance, we don't want to change you for anything. You're perfect, But you. I don't need to be you. Do you see what I mean?
You're very sweet. We need to come on to the individuals in the audience, or we're going to run out of time. We have charming people with microphones. Where are my charming people? There's one there. Right. So let me start. This person with a very keen hand up there. Now, that's it, my darling. Don't run. I believe it's positively bad for you. Could I just ask? It's an old-fashioned thing, but could you ask a question rather than make a speech? That would be, my preferred option. And also, if you just tell us your name.
Hello, my name's Rosie.
Hi,
I'd like
Rosie.
to just briefly ask you something about this idea of women oppressing other women. And do you not think it's the case that what's happening is that one of the very clever things that neo-patriarchy does is that it seeks the complicity of women in their own oppression and it makes them the agents of their own subordination? Is not something going on there, perhaps?
I wish, Rosie, that you had been in charge. That was terrific. Who wants to pick that up?
Well, since I said it, can I? I think you're right, but I also think that we have to go beyond that sometimes we have to ask women to take some responsibility. We were given a brain, you don't have to do it, and when I see that in families, mothers-in-law, who themselves were oppressed, maybe that's why, are actually capable of the most grotesque cruelties to their daughters-in-law, more than any man in the family. I don't know what one does about it. Do we say, oh, it's because there is a whole generational oppression that is being passed down, or is it time to say, we now live in a world where we're talking, we're thinking, we're discussing this. Think about what you're doing to this young woman. So, I'm torn. I think you're right. In my jobs, I've seen women turn from feminists to complete kind of, what's the word, appeasers.
It's no way to talk about Melody Phillips.
But we have to take some responsibility now. We have to take some responsibility
Can I say
for
something?
change.
I lived in India for a few years, and I saw in my street in India, in Mumbai, 5 women were burned to death, stove accident. We all know it's like dowry thing, and 5 women were burned to death. And the situation of mothers-in-law towards their daughter-in-law, and this is why I talk about human revolution, because what we need is that mother to say, well, it happened to me, but let it not happen to my stepdaughter. Yeah. And this is it. This is what we need. And that person, you can give her everything. It's going to be something, how do you call it? It was nice, you said, it's incredible self-challenge, but with yourself, because you feel, why would I not, impose that when I've been imposed that? Well, maybe because I'm a woman, maybe because I, whatever reason, I don't do that. And this is how history changes, And this is why I always come back to individuals, because this is how history changes. And this is why no one is, not welcome to help with that change, whoever you are. And if you want to go on the stage and show your ass, do it. That's not my problem. The same way it's not my problem if it's Shia or Sunni or whatever, And I think we have to have this kind of tolerance if we really want real change.
I'm doing a show on this stage tomorrow night. I'm suddenly thinking about showing my ass. Could happen. Hello, darling. This one just here. What is your name?
Hi, my name is Kushal.
Hello, Kushal.
I am a lawyer in London, but I am from India, born, brought up, lived all my life there. Now, just going back to the first conversation we had about the documentary which was banned, I just want to say, yes, I agree, it shouldn't have been banned. It's a mirror to India's mentality, and yes, that needed to be said. And it could also be that this documentary is a garb for nationalism, as we were talking about. But I just do think that the problem that Indians have, because I've seen it so much on my Facebook feed all over the place and all these conversations happening, there's a feeling that there's a neo-colonial agenda here, firstly. Because the dominant narrative in Western media about the documentary, about the rape, has had the effect of reducing India to a single story about women's safety, about women's position in society. And do you think that the media has a role to play in highlighting other stories from India, like the fact that India's 3 largest banks have women CEOs, or India's 3 largest law firms had 70% of their partnership as women, the people who were promoted in the last, say, 6 years. And that's a story that's worth highlighting in the context of feminism in the UK.
Have you seen the film?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I think it's a love story to India myself. I think it's a most wonderful portrayal of India's reaction to an appalling situation. But I pass it on to B.
Well, I think you're right. And I think if we're trying to think about what you've just said in the context of backlash, what is it that we want to say? The thing that was revealed in the testimony of the young men who were the perpetrators was exactly where the fault lines of the argument lie. And what they disclosed was a historic, entrenched, resourced, institutionalised disposition towards women that the other thing that was marvellous about the documentary revealed was it is challenged. And of course, what we know, it's like when women leave domestic violence, that's the most dangerous moment. And so something is afoot in India that is so completely interesting. The young man who was her friend, who described his conversations with her, what kind of person she was. Her father, who'd sold He
sold his ancestral land so she could become a doctor.
To educate her. Her mother, who could not have been more eloquent. And you look at it, I imagine, and you think, this is a traditional woman. Well, yes. And what a very complicated thing that might be. So the story about India that was disclosed was of a society that is in tumult over patriarchy. Fantastic. At last. Great.
Can I just say that I think where the most extraordinary feminists I know are Indian feminists and Pakistani feminists. They risk their lives every day for what they do. So I salute them. But I don't buy into this neo-colonialist thing because we have had 10 years of shining India here. The great global power, the economics, Bollywood, we've had nothing but the amazing India stories. And India's been very good at that. And I think people forgot that this is going on until this emblematic event happened. So I think as human beings, and here I do completely agree, we are human beings in an interconnected global world. And it isn't neo-colonial to examine. We had two programs here on what this government is doing to female asylum seekers. It was just as shocking. They had secret film of Yarlswood, and they revealed the level of hypocrisy, cruelty, sexual danger that these poor women who had been multiply raped, risked their lives to get here. So we're not just picking on, it's not a colonial thing, it's an internationalist sensibility, because we are living in an interconnected world. And sometimes I think the neo-colonialist accusation is used to stop us looking.
Isn't that a narrative thing again? No, we have a situation where a girl was raped. The perpetrators, doesn't even see what the big deal is and what's the fuss about. This is the reality. So how do you react? You're in the Indian government. You have to find a reason, to stop that. So, but we're smarter, aren't we smarter?
I don't know sometimes.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that we can read into this thing. You're talking about the media. I mean, the media, it belongs to the power fire. Of course, if you have the media, you have the voice. It's as simple as that. Okay, so I think that I'm just saying that to say we have to also think ahead, and especially young people today think ahead and undo these kind of obstacles before they arise.
I just want to tell you a good story because it shows what a society can do with this. In Vietnam, there's a fantastic museum in Hanoi dedicated to women. It's the most amazing museum I've ever in my whole life seen. And it's fantastic. It's got these tribal people where women hold power and property goes to the youngest daughter, and the child takes on the woman's surname and all that, but also a story of what they did in the wars that had beset them, and honoring women not for everything from what they've done. And it's so strong, that culture, that there is hardly any leching, leering at women on the streets of Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh. Women are utterly safe to walk around. And I really compared that to how I felt when I was walking around in Delhi, that they managed to do something here, really extraordinary, I think.
That's a wonderful story. It's another vote for matriarchy.
And communism,
And,
actually.
oh, is it? Okay.
Actually, that's
You're all right with that, being, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Okay, just here we have a very nice person. What is your name?
My name is Naomi.
Hi, Naomi.
I just wanted to say, I believe in the media a lot. There's been a lot of increase in kind of stories that basically shut down the debate completely. One saying like women have the opportunities and they obviously don't want to, which leads to what I really don't like is a lot of these reports of scientific studies and investigations, which they're reporting as saying, well, nothing can be done, it's biological, that's just the way women are, or that's just the way men are. I don't know, I was wondering what your opinions were on that.
Marianne? Do you want to pick that one up?
That's the PMS thing, no?
Well, yeah, we can't help ourselves, we're hysterical.
I'm immune, but and because the reason why is that for this kind of thing don't touch me, because when I tell you, about this thing about individual, I know the price of that. I am the living example of that, and it's an everyday battle, and that's why I'm not vulnerable. And that's why I invited you, I'm inviting you to be, is like, when you know who you are, and you fighting, and you're not like only fighting outside and, and screaming and shouting, but also doing the work that you need to be tolerant when people like just drive you crazy, and they come up with like, and I've been covering women's issues for a long time. I've seen a lot of crazy people, but I went to dialogue with them because I had to understand. Right? And so because I do all this work on myself, and I'm morning and evening, I feel legitimate, and I
Doesn't worry you. There is some truth in that biology thing, though. The four of us have been backstage long enough. This month our cycles are colliding. It's a nice person in a stripy matelot top. Don't hear the word matelot enough, do you? There we are.
Hi, my name's Rasha. I'll try and be concise. It's going back to kind of the slight disagreement you guys had. So I'm obviously from, I guess, the current wave, and my mum is from the 70s wave. And I have this, and I know friends of mine have the same struggle, this like inner conflict between letting people be, just like saying, yes, you're welcome however you are, you can wear what you want, whenever you want, do what you want, whenever you want, and then also knowing that some things are wrong and that are contributing to a system that is bad, and where, I'm asking for your help in how you resolve that inner struggle of deciding sometimes to say, no, that's not okay, but then, I don't know, how do you know what to allow and what to say, no, that's a principle, and that's wrong and that's contributing to the badness.
I think it is very difficult. So Beyonce might stand up for women's rights, but she does it in her underwear. Do you know what I mean? Is that the sort of thing that you're talking about? B, what do you think about that?
I think a riot of thoughts. I've got a granddaughter who's 2 and a genius. And, well, actually, when I told her that she was marvellous, she said, no, I'm adorable. And anyway, she's frozen, top to toe frozen. But she's a tank. And she marauds around the place. Her brother, here is the chance. I keep my mouth shut at the moment about pink. But for some reason, a T-shirt appeared on his person, and he's a divine being, he's 6, that said, boys rule. And you think, wow, how the hell did that get there? Who? And again, have
they not met you before? Is this?
And he would taunt me with it, and he would say things like, "You could have a pink one that says that, kind of thing." And eventually, I did say to him, "Do you know what? Who are your favourite people in the whole world?" And it's his mummy and his sister. And I said, "And they're girls. So how?" And I thought, I don't want to be horrible. I adore him so much, I don't want to do anything that is going to make him have that quiver of some sense that he is in any way disapproved of, because he's just 6, for Christ's sake. So, I'm telling you that story because it's by way of saying it's tricky. And we all are just doing our best trying to sort this stuff out. And that is why having a great movement like ours is so useful, because it helps us manage all this tricky stuff that on your own is too difficult. It's too tricky. And that's why political movements like feminism are so beautiful, because you don't just have a set of demands, you have a space in which you can have a think and a fret and worry and then say, get that t-shirt off.
But I think you're right. The problem is it's not black and white, is it? It's, well, it's 50 Shades of Grey. There we are. That's, right over in the corner there. Have we got any... Oh, up there, I don't want to miss the people. Do we have another person running? My darling, can you make your way slowly and gently? Up to that one up there. Can you put your hand back up, my lovely, so the person can see you? And one over in this corner would be fantastic. So let's start with you over here.
Thank you. I'm Elena. Do you think that maybe consumerism has something to do in our own complicity in perpetuating the position of women, primarily as consumers of fashion, of trends? What's your view on that?
I'm going to come to you, Marianne, because you're the person I know most on the panel who's had to deal with that. You've had to deal with Gucci and you've had to deal with Kellogg's and so on. Is that something that's a necessary thing now, the consumerism, as part of how the movement is going to have to go forward?
You know, I worry about girls, for sure, because I think it's really, really difficult when you're a young girl to resist that wave of, you should look like this, you should... But again, it's an education thing, because if you read it, then it doesn't have an influence on you so much anymore, or you use it, because we're going to come to the point, I hope, that, when a brand says this is how you look, it's a matter, it's a narrative. I mean, I'm not obsessed with that, but I'm just saying, there's a... it's like brainwash. I mean, they're trying to make you think I should look like that, or I'm not worth anything. This is what you have to fight about, Then whether you like to shop or not shop, it doesn't really matter, But recapture your own power, meaning recapture the fact that that no, you don't have to do it like that, Make the difference. Keep the fun. It's fine, It's fine to have fun, okay? Even though it is like, the situation that you can be yourself. You can be yourself. I think that it is difficult nowadays. I mean, I have a son. He's a 12-year-old son. I don't have a daughter, and I worry. I would worry with my daughter, because how do I resist the wave of consumerism and the boys and right now, like, my boy is 12. If he finds himself in a room with a girl, like they all go like, crazy, both of them, and so, he's a boy, and the girl is a girl, and it's fine. But I think that that problem of consumerism is the same than image of women in the media. It's the same than, the lack of academic people in the, the lack of women in the theater. It's the same thing. It's the same narrative, And so recapturing this, and I think we can only do it through education, really, and get all the way to the freedom of being able to use what you want without being manipulated by it.
Okay, thank you very much. Up here, somebody's already got the microphone.
Hi, I'm Brian.
Is it on? Oh.
Oh, hi.
Batteries don't last
I'm
as long as you'd like.
Microphones.
What's your name?
I'm Bryony. Hello.
Hello, Bryony.
Last year at WOW, I saw an Australian feminist talk about the gradual erosion of rights that we've probably all taken for granted, really, particularly in the West. And she described particularly the nibbling away at laws that, one example was about abortion laws around the world, in Australia, in the US, places where you think, that's as it is, and we're just all marching forward inexorably with our rights. And I just wondered what you all thought about that, really, because we don't necessarily hear a lot about that in the press, if it's done very gradually.
Yasmin?
I think it's a very good point because, like I said right at the beginning, the journey never really ends. And, one must never be complacent. Of course, we're much more fortunate here. But, I look at the papers. When was the last time you saw a case taken up at tribunal, a sex discrimination case? The only cases that now seem to be taken up are by women who work in very expensive jobs in the city. There was a time when actually sex discrimination cases were being heard regularly, as were race discrimination cases. Slowly, the withdrawal of the permission has almost been withdrawn, and people don't feel brave enough. Yes, instead we go and see a musical about Dagenham, and we think we're really cool. Actually, these are really important things. You have to, it's like a plant, you have to keep watering it. And some have just been taken away. When you take away legal aid, the way the benefits cuts are affecting women as almost a matter of policy, especially lone women with children. How are they supposed to feel powerful or able to take on a system when they can't even feed their kids in this country anymore, So I think we are actually in a very bad place.
We sure are. When this government introduced their austerity budget, and Yvette Cooper, who's very good at sums, did the sums, and yielded the figure that 72% of the cost of these austerity cuts would be borne by women, in a sense that tells you everything you need to know. That is what this ideological imperative is all about. And it's about shrinking social welfare, social solidarity, the state actually, terribly, terribly important to women, both as a source of employment and a source of service and a space for politics. The space for politics that we all need is being shrunk. So we know what this neoliberal project is all about. And I think you're right to put the question in the way that you did, because even as that's happening, we have, can you believe it? We've got a piece of legislation that was passed hurriedly by the last government that said all policy making must be judged through the filter of its implications for equality, for gender. And that budget was not subjected to an equality impact assessment. I know because I rang them up and said, have you done an equality impact assessment? And they said, oh yes. And I said, where is it? Well, I'm sure we've done it. Where is it? They hadn't done it. So it tells you something really important about this is a government. All of its departments are legally obliged to do equality impact assessments, and they just don't. They just don't. This is the impunity that we're having to live with. The implications are absolutely devastating. This is why you have to name what it is. This is why this neoliberal project is not actually about liberating women who can suddenly make all sorts of choices. They can choose to work, for example, for £6.50 or £6.60. A lot of our paid care is being conducted now by women whose jobs would have once been in local government, and they would have had a pension, and they would have been paid more than the minimum wage, and whose working conditions and pay and time would have been the subject, it must be admitted, to relatively patriarchal trade unions, but nonetheless to something, and now they're paid in washers. And if they protest, you'll be told, well, actually, I know you had 60 hours last week, darling, but 20 hours this week. They know that there is no room for political manoeuvre in an economy that is shaped by these neoliberal and inevitably neo-patriarchal values. And that's how serious this is.
Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Can I just say...